welcome to another video. This is episode 56 of the podcast, and let's just get right into it. It has been quite a while since I recorded episode 55. I have been very busy, a bit overwhelmed with a lot of things, and I first just would like to talk about some changes that are going to happen to the channel, because there have been some changes in my life. For one, a very insignificant change is that the Miffy notebook is gone. Yeah, I filled it out. So yeah, that kind of felt good, having just one notebook filled with all the notes for the past couple of episodes. But yeah, so not that important. But what is important is that I acquired a knitting machine, a Toyota KS 901 or 901 with a ribbon. I think it's called the KR 505. Yes, I think that's the model. So I got a second-hand one back in December, and I spent the entire Christmas holiday, day and night, just figuring out how to use it. I watched YouTube videos, I read a lot, and I practiced, of course. So a lot of my brain power has gone towards all of that. And that also means that I will be featuring things that I have knit with my machine. For the past couple of weeks, I've had some issues with my shoulder. Some of you might know that my left shoulder was hurting, and I went to the doctor, got that fixed, and then the right one decided to get in on the fun, so to speak. So I was having pain at the base of my neck and my back. I think it's called the rhomboid section. That section was hurting a lot, and the pain shot all the way from there to my fingertips. So whenever I was knitting or crocheting, it was just very uncomfortable, and I figured that it actually wasn't because of how much I was knitting and crocheting. I thought that was the issue. That's why I took about a 2-week break or so, but the pain stayed, and it turned out it was mostly because of the way that I was sleeping. I was putting some, I don't really sleep in a good position, and because of that I was putting a lot of pressure on, what's the English word for it? The Dutch word is zenuw. Here's the English word. I was putting a lot of pressure on that when I was sleeping, and so yeah, it was just canal de zenuw is what it's called. So in any case, I did a couple of exercises to create more space in my vertebrae. I don't think I'm explaining this all too well, and I have now switched to sleeping with a pillow between my legs in order to prevent myself from moving into very uncomfortable positions. And within a week and a half, most of the pain just disappeared. So that was very nice. Yes, so that's that. A knitting machine. What else? Oh, yes, I got a job. I started working at the start of January, and it's been really fun. I work for a yarn company, so I can kind of say that I'm finally professionally within the industry. So yeah, it's been great, although it has taken me some time to get used to this schedule of working a couple of days and just doing the rest of my life. But I do feel comfortable now, where I feel not overwhelmed, and I can continue making content. So that's that. Then the final update, and I think the thing that is going to have the most impact on the channel, and that is that I have decided to make knitwear commercially, I would say, and I'm working towards making knitting patterns as well. So as a kind of, yeah, basically just as a small business, very small scale, because it's just going to be me and my knitting machine, and I plan to make reproductions of knitwear from mostly the 30s up until the 50s, using American, British, French, Dutch, Japanese and Italian patterns. Those are the patterns that I feel most comfortable making stuff with. Maybe in the future I'll add some more countries, but yeah, I just thought it would be a fun thing to do. So that's something that I'm doing. So it's something that will pop up on the channel, of course. So I'm going to do that, so reproductions of the actual knitwear, and then I also plan to make knitting patterns inspired by vintage knitwear, and I also plan on grading vintage patterns in order to make them more accessible to people. I kind of feel like that was the trajectory my channel was going towards anyway. I started with vintage patterns at the start of last year and have just fallen in love with them. I just think they're so unique, and so many different countries have gone into different knitting spaces, or there's always something new and interesting to find in these vintage patterns. There's a lot of variety and a lot of things to talk about technically, and so I just thought it would be great to do something fun with that. My content is definitely going to become a bit more technical because I'm just learning a lot at the moment, and with my knitting machine making things way faster than they used to be. The learning curve is very high, so I plan to share as much as I can on this channel. And yeah, I think most of you who come to this channel are interested in these sort of things, so I don't know, I see it as a positive. So if there's anything in particular that you would like for me to cover in future videos, please do let me know in the comment section below. I think a couple of weeks ago I also made a community post asking if there was anything in particular that you wanted to see, and some of you commented, for instance, showing how to use or work with a Japanese pattern. So that is something that I'm going to try and do, and I also thought it would be fun to take a very old Japanese patterns from the 40s, 50s, and kind of show you the process of how I translate that, how I get through something like that. But yeah, those are all ideas for in the future. Is there anything else I would like to say? I completely forgot to say this at the start of the episode, but I am still planning to knit for pleasure as well. So that means that aside from just vintage patterns that I will be working on with regards to grading and actually reproducing, I am just also going to continue making stuff for myself for fun. I'm, for instance, still working on that cave facet stone circles sweater, although I haven't really done much with that. And I also have some yarn for an Alice Starmore sweater, so that stuff is still going to be there. I'm not going to just only focus on my own stuff. That's the goal. Yeah, that's basically it for now. So yes, let's get into the actual knitwear. And I realized the first thing that I wanted to talk about is not here, so I need to go and get that. Ta-da! So this is the first thing that I made on my knitting machine. It's from a vintage pattern booklet called Jack Frost Blouse Book Volume 27 from 1938. As for the specs, the yarn that I used, well, this is yarn that I've used before. I used it for a vintage German pattern from the 50s. I believe it was a circular yoke with a ribbed yoke. And I eventually figured out that it was from the British yarn manufacturer Knoll. It's the lamb's wool yarn. It has a yardage of 850 meters per 100 grams. So lace weight 425 meters per 50 grams. And it's a 2-ply yarn. The color is, I thought, 232, if I'm not mistaken. It's a beige color. But yeah, this is the blouse. The construction is a pretty straightforward vintage construction. So everything is, well, actually not completely conventional. So you start at the bottom with some 1x1 rib. You actually start at the back. Then you increase on one row evenly, and then you work up straight up until it's time for the armhole shaping. You cast off a couple of stitches, then you decrease for a number of rows, and then you knit up straight up until this point where it's time to separate the two halves of the back. So you work one half separately up until you have reached the desired armhole depth, and then you're supposed to cast off stitches here in order to do some shoulder shaping to accommodate the shoulders. So you do that, you go back to the stitches that you've left here on hold, you do the exact same thing, and then you use some single crochet in American terms, double crochet in British terms. You use that for the keyhole here at the back. Then for the front, you do something similar. There are a couple of differences. You knit the front right before the armhole about half a centimeter. I think it's 0.2 inches. Yes, in American terms. You knit the front that much longer than the back to accommodate the bust a bit better. And then once you have reached, well, you don't completely finish the armhole shaping at this point, but I don't know if you can see here, there is actually some garter stitch detailing here. It's a point here and then it goes straight up. So you do that by just knitting some garter stitch here, and then every row you increase the garter stitch pattern, or no, every other row you increase the garter stitch pattern by 1 stitch on each side, and then when you have your desired width, then you knit straight up. So I do think that this is inspired by Schiaparelli. So she was I'm pretty sure an Italian designer, and she's had a huge impact on the fashion industry, and one of her most iconic designs were these faux, how would you say it, faux collar bow ties. So you'd have a sweater and then you'd have a bow tie print on top of that. So that was quite fashionable in the 30s, I believe, and it definitely came from Italy, France, all the way to America. And I do think that this is kind of, I wouldn't say symptom, but you can definitely see that that's something that inspired this design. In any case, you continue doing the armhole shaping whilst you're making this subtle tie detail, and then you get to the point where you have to do the actual neck shaping. You cast off a couple of stitches, and then you decrease, just creating the entire not arm, neck shape. And then after that, you come in and you pick up stitches for the collar. And this is actually one of my favorite details about this entire piece, is this double collar. I think it's so unique and it's super fun. It's the first time that I did this, so I didn't do it all that well, but I think that it worked out quite nicely. So the way this is created is you pick up just a tiny amount of stitches here at the front, and then you do a number of increases here for the just for the collar shaping, and then every other row you pick up more and more stitches around the neckline up until the top of the shoulder. Then you cast off. You do the same thing for this side, and then once you've done that, you pick up stitches on top of that again, and you do essentially the same thing, but instead of working to the top of the shoulder, you go all the way to the center of the back, and then you have this very nice garter stitch collar. Oh yes, and I would like to mention that actually for the body at the front there are more stitches than at the back, and this is again to accommodate the bust. Yes, so once you've done the front and the back section, you seam those together, and then it's time for the sleeves. Now, the sleeve construction is actually quite interesting because usually, traditionally with vintage patterns, you start at the top or you start at the bottom, and if you start at the bottom, for the sleeve cap shaping, you essentially just cast off stitches, and then you decrease, and then you cast off a number of stitches at the top to get that bell shape for the sleeve cap. And if you were going from the top to the bottom, you do it in the opposite way, so cast on a number of stitches, then increase, and then cast on a number of stitches. But this one is quite interesting. So it is a puffed sleeve, and instead of knitting the sleeve separately, you actually pick up stitches at the top of the shoulder, and then every row you add more stitches. Well, first you pick up a number of stitches, and then the second row you increase heavily, so every stitch you increase, so you double the amount of stitches in order to get a bit of a puff at the top. And then once you've done that, every row at the end of it you pick up 5 stitches, and you do that at the front and at the back until you have picked up all of your stitches. And then you've essentially done the sleeve cap shaping in that way. And once that is done, you just work even up until right before the ribbing. You decrease heavily to create this puff here, and then you do the ribbing, and then you're essentially done. Well, after you've seamed up everything, you're done. So I had a lot of fun making this. I thought this was really interesting. I made a number of modifications which I'll talk about. But first I wanted to mention that I had some fit issues with this top. So I actually went to Reddit to ask what was going on, because as I was working on it, I tried it on a couple of times and I could just see that the yoke had weird folds. There was this fold here that looked like this. Yeah, I had some issues and I managed to resolve that. But let me tell you about the modifications that I made. For one, I actually omitted the extra amount at the front that I was supposed to knit before the armhole shaping, because I didn't understand why I had to do it. I thought I could leave it out, which in hindsight I could. Like, it wasn't that big of an issue, but it actually does help to get a better fit on your piece, if that's correct English. So I made that modification. What else did I do? Yes, I did my typical switching the staircase cast off for the shoulder shaping. I switched that to just plain short rows. I leave the live stitches on, and then once I finished the back and the front, I just do a 3 needle bind off, because it's easy. It gives a very clean seam. Yes, seam as, let me pull it down a bit. Yeah, a nice and clean seam. And it makes it easier for if you have messed up and you need to go back, you can just unravel that, bind off, and then you have the live stitches instead of having to rip out a seam. And is that everything I did? Yes, okay. And then, so less rows here at the front, the typical shoulder shaping. Then for the sleeves, because I was doing this on a knitting machine, I figured that it would just be easier. Instead of picking up the stitches at the sleeves, I decided to knit this separately. So I just cast on a couple of stitches from the top, and then I did the shaping in that way. Yes, so that's the way that I created this. And like I said before, I had some issues with the yoke, so I took to Reddit, and there were a couple of opinions. So yeah, people just gave their advice and told me what they felt was the issue. And there were a couple of things. Someone mentioned, well, someone asked if I set in the sleeve, and I was a bit confused because they said that my stitches weren't coming into the body at an angle. And I was just so confused. I was like thinking, what do they mean? I set in the sleeve. I looked up a YouTube tutorial, Very Pink Knits, and did that. In hindsight, I didn't set in the sleeve properly, and so it was going in quite straight, which was not helping the fit. And so yeah, one of the reasons why it wasn't looking nice was just sheer inexperience with satin sleeves. So that's something that I fixed whilst working on this piece, because I ended up, I think, creating 2 or 3 alternate sleeves to try and see if that could fix the fit. And so I spent a lot of time setting in different types of sleeves to check all of that out. That was one thing. The second thing was that someone said that the shoulder section here was a bit too wide for me. And so what happens is that if your shoulder is too narrow for the sweater, it starts drooping over like a drop shoulder, and that's how the armhole kind of collapses and falls, and you get the folds that were there. So that was a thing I was considering looking at. So I had these 2 options. Either I rip out everything here up until the armhole shaping, and I try to figure out something that works best for me, or I just try and see maybe if the sleeve cap can be changed and maybe that can improve the fit, because some people also said that the sleeve cap was rather shallow. So yes, I thought, okay, I'll just go and try and do the easiest thing, and that's the sleeve cap. I looked up a ton of information with regards to satin sleeves, how to calculate them, how to get a good fit, tips on how to set in the sleeves correctly. And so I found a couple of videos that were helpful. I found a video about how a sewing ham can actually help to fill out the space here in order to seam the sweater better. So that was interesting. I also found this article, well, someone posted it on in the comments of the Reddit post, to an article on Knitty.com, talking about how to construct a satin sleeve. Basically, the perimeter of the arm side should be equal to the perimeter of the sleeve cap, and actually the sleeve cap has to be equal to that or max 2.5 centimeters longer, so that you can then ease in some of that extra length. I also found some information from one of Deborah Newton's books. I think it's Designing Knitwear. That also has a section talking about how to design a different types of sleeve caps. So that was very interesting. Yes, so what I ended up doing is I made a bunch of sleeves. I tried them all out, and they all kind of didn't look that nice. And so what I ended up doing was going back to the original sleeve. I had learned so much about setting in a sleeve that I set it in better, and the piece just looked better. And also one thing that I completely forgot was that the back, I hadn't attached the hook and eye to it, and so that was also contributing to the ill fit, because it when I put the closure, it kind of took in the shoulder length, if that makes any sense, and it looked much better. So I managed to solve it. However, I did notice that despite all of these changes, that the shoulder length was a bit too wide for myself. So I ended up spending quite some time looking into what would be the right width for the cross front sections of the knitwear that I make for myself. So that has been very helpful. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this? Oh, it's the first time I actually used a hook and eye closure, and I did it incorrectly. So I need to fix that in the future. But regardless of that, I think it worked out pretty well. Oh yeah, there is this thing though. It does seem symmetric when I'm holding it now, but once I wear this top, the collar shifts a bit and it looks kind of wonky. So I don't know what's up with that. I do have to figure that out. So yes, that is everything with regards to Cecile. Moving on to some books. Actually, I definitely want to talk about the literature that I'm using to gain experience and knowledge within the knitwear design field. And I have a lot of books. I think I mentioned last year that I acquired the old knitwear design books from someone in Japan. So I have about 10 of those from the 60s up until the 80s, I believe. And it's all very interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about the two books that I have used quite a bit the past couple of weeks. There are other books, but those will be discussed in the future. This one I had mentioned before. It's the Praktische Bibliotheek voor de Vrouw, so practical library for the woman, Handboek voor breien en haken, handbook for knitting and crochet. So this is a book from the 1950s. It's a Dutch book, and basically this is just an introduction to knitting and crochet, and also some other handcraft skills such as tatting. And one part that I thought was really interesting is this section right here, and I think I also mentioned this in a previous episode. Yeah, here they give you some instructions on how to actually create your own block pattern for a bodice and for sleeves. So this is something that apparently used to be quite common within knitting, that you would have your own block for patterns, because as most of you know, with vintage patterns, usually one or maybe 2 or 3 sizes were given, and so if you didn't have that particular size, you would have to figure it out on your own. And so having a basic block for your bodice and your sleeves made it more manageable to take a pattern, look at it, and then apply it to your own block, and then have something for yourself. I've seen these instructions in Dutch books and in Japanese ones, but never in English ones. But that's just because I haven't really looked into that many old knitting manuals. But I do think that that is something that used to be a thing within the English knitting community as well. I actually posted something about this on Reddit, asking why having these types of block patterns aren't very common at the moment, and I got a number of interesting comments, and I think the conclusion that I can draw from that is that they're not really necessary anymore, at least when it comes to modern patterns. Most of them come in a very large range of sizes, so you don't really need to do that extra calculation for your own body. And aside from that, the styles that are popular at the moment are very oversized. So when you look at sweaters that have 10 centimeters of positive ease, there's no real need to get very accurate patterns, or very accurate numbers, I should say. That's basically the reason. In any case, there were some people in the comments who were interested in learning how to make their own block, so I ended up looking at the instructions here, and at some of my old and new Japanese books on drafting knitwear. And so I made a tiny document where you can make that you can use to create your own pattern block, or block pattern. So I will leave a link to my Ko-fi where you can download a PDF version of it. It's a pay what you want scheme, so if you want it for free, just type in 0, and then I think you click join now or get now or something, and then you'll instantly have it. Yeah, so there's that. This one's really cool, very interesting, a very nice look into how knitting was in the Netherlands in the 50s. Then I have this book here, Brother Knitting School textbook, and the title might deceive you into thinking that this is an English book, but in actuality it's Japanese. So I got this when I was studying in Japan. I think I might have shown this book before, almost 2 years ago at this point, and I was just very confused about what this exactly was, how to use it. But I figured it out now. It took some time, and I'm finally at that level where I'm ready to at least get the initial information out of this book. So it's from the year Showa 35 in Japan, aside from a Christian era time. they also use the reign of their emperors as a time. So Showa, you have the Showa emperor, and this book came out in the 36th year of his reign, which translates to 1961, I believe. Is that correct? Yes, 1961. Yeah, so this book starts off with, well, it is actually, I should tell you what this book actually is. It's a textbook that was used at trade schools to teach people how to knit, how to use a knitting machine to knit, in particular the Brother knitting machine. So the first couple of sections, the first chapter really goes into what the knitting machine is. So the equipment, how you use it, how to increase, how to decrease, all of that stuff. And then once you're done with all of that information, it's time to actually get into drafting. So they have here is this one is actually more complex than the one that I now have on my Ko-fi. I'm still working this out for myself at the moment, but you take a number of measurements, and then here's a list of all of the measurements that you should have. And then once you have that, so a list of it and explanations. And so they give you example. So you have 3 size examples: small, medium, and large. Small is 80 centimeters. The bust circumference is 80 centimeters. Then medium is 84 centimeters. So I would fall right in between small and medium. And then you have large, with it, which is 90 centimeters. Yeah, so a very small size range, but it doesn't really matter the sizes here, at least, because you're supposed to just input your own sizes to get your own block. So this is just as an example. Although, because the size range is so small, there's not that much information on certain modifications that you might have to do if you have a body shape that veers a bit away from the standard ones that are given here. So for instance, you have more fullness at the bust or more fullness at your stomach area. So to supplement that, you could have a look at Big Girl Knits or Knitting Plus. I find Knitting Plus to be very interesting in terms of making modifications for yourself. Yeah, and so basically they give you this table here and here. There's more information on specific extra calculations you have to make to get more information from your initial measurements, and then that is all used to create this block here. So it's for the bodice and then the sleeve. And then here they give you a step-by-step rundown of how to exactly do that, and you can see the drawings here. So for instance, here is said that you start with the length of your bodice, so you draw a straight line down, and then next up you draw a quarter of your full bust circumference here, and then you just keep on drawing until you have your entire bodice. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm learning how to perfect my own at the moment. And then after that, there's just so much information. There's information on how to use your block to create different types of knitwear. So how to do a skirt. There's some information on how to do a pullover. You have a raglan here, and because this is actually for people who are going into the knitwear industry in the 60s and 70s. So I mean it was really prolific. So it's all very much so in depth, very interesting. And at the back, I mean, they even have a cardigan, a kimono cardigan, how to make that. Here it is, I think. Oh, they have a kimono coat here. They also have a cardigan, and there's also a section for kids, and then also for men, a tiny section for men at the end right here. So that's all super interesting, and this is definitely a book I'm going to look back at the more I progress. It's just super cool. So yeah, those are the two books that I've been looking at. Moving on, I have revisited an old sweater. So oh wait, this is this is the front right here. So this is actually the Rosemonde blouse that I had attempted to knit up a couple of months ago. So first, some specs. This is also from a Jack Frost booklet. It's from their blouse book volume 28, which I believe is from 1939. As for the yarn, this is yarn from Donegal Yarns. I got it wholesale. It's a one-ply yarn from their Irish heather yarn, which consists of 60% fine Irish heather, I think, or maybe it's fine Irish wool. I'm not too sure, but yes, it's 60% Irish wool and then 40% New Zealand wool. And this is in the color Sky 8077, and the yardage is 225 meters per 50 grams, so it's a fingering weight yarn. So the gauge that I used for this was 28 stitches and 42 rows in a 10 centimeter square. Some of you might remember that the first attempt wasn't as successful. I would say it was a mission successfully failed. Basically what had happened, I had about 150 grams of some fingering weight Isia tweed yarn from another project, and I thought I could make a tiny blouse out of that. So I did that, and I had finished the back and the front. I had seamed it, and then I wore it, and I was wearing a shirt underneath it, and I thought it looked really nice as just a vest. And so I opted out of actually knitting the sleeves. I'm pretty sure I mentioned in the past that I was looking to give this another go, and then actually with sleeves. So I did it, and it worked out. So I did modify this heavily based on a block that I was trying to, well, the block that I've been trying to create for myself, and I think it worked out quite well. There are some tweaks I would still like to make to the shoulders. In any case, the original construction is very similar to the Cecile blouse. You start at the bottom, you work some ribbing, then you work up until the armhole. Yes, up until the start of the armhole, you cast off a number of stitches, and then you the crease, and then you work up until you have reached your desired armhole depth, and then you cast off, and then you seam it, and then you pick up stitches. For the neck, you do 1 by 1 ribbing, and then for the sleeves you do the same thing, I believe, with picking up stitches at the top and then picking up more and more and more stitches until you have the entire sleeve. So actually, before starting this sweater, I looked at the first vest that I had made, and I found that the shoulders were a bit too long, too wide. And this is something that I have quite recently noticed. I have quite narrow shoulders. That was something I wasn't very much so aware of with just my regular clothes, but when you're knitting and you're knitting in order to create a fit that's really nice, you start to notice certain things about basically how you wear your clothes. And so I figured I really needed to chop off some length here at the sides. The thing is that once you change something to the shoulder, the shoulder length at the side of the armhole, you're going to also have to change the sleeve cap, because the shape here has changed, and so your sleeve has to accommodate for that change. So essentially what I did was I decided how much I wanted here at the cross front, which I also chose for the back. The cross back is actually a bit wider than the front, but since it's knitwear, it can stretch out to accommodate your shoulders, or that section of your back. And it's better than if you had too much yarn, too much fabric, and it droops. So that's what I did. I decided the width and then figured out how many more decreases I had to do. So I just started from scratch again. I took half of the stitches that I needed to cast off and decrease at one side, and just put that in the initial cast off, and then I just used, I'm not too sure which decrease rate, but I used a decrease rate for the armholes here. So yeah, what I did was I calculated the perimeter of the sleeve, then what did I do? Yes, I looked at Deborah Newton's Designing Knitwear book, and then I calculated the sleeve cap. Yeah, it was just, yeah, it's not an exact science, if that makes any sense, also because you have to keep in mind the type of style that you want for your sleeve. So it's a lot of making adjustments. Is this going to look nice? And it just costs a bit of time to work out the sleeve. It's I would say actually it's quite an art skill, so to speak. Yeah, so I did that, and then I just kept the rest the same. I decided to knit the sleeves separately. I just thought it would be easier, especially if I was going to make more iterations to see if the fit would improve. So I did that, and then another change that I did was I lowered the back. Yes, I lowered the back, and I did this basically by taking 1 centimeter of the back of the armhole and then added it to the front. So I made the front 2 centimeters higher than the back. And essentially what happens is that, when you can see it when you're holding it on a hanger, the excess fabric falls over the shoulder, and so the seam is here. And the seam I did the same way as with the Cecile blouse, just short rows and then a 3 needle bind off. So again, it looks quite clean, but as you can see, it's at the back, and so you can see that the back here is lower, because if I hadn't done that, the neck would be slightly higher. And what I noticed in the, with the first sweater is that the neck was creeping up, the ribbing was creeping up my neck. So I thought, okay, if I do that, the back gets lowered a bit. So you could essentially compare this to what you would usually do with a Guernsey type sweater bottom up in terms of back neck shaping. So you start at the bottom, you work your way up, and then at some point, well, at this point, you would cast off stitches here, and then you would work about 1 centimeter at the shoulders in order to create the shoulder shaping, and just a bit more height so that your neck, the sweater won't creep up your neck once you add the ribbing to it. So this is just another way of doing it. I have found in a lot of vintage patterns, a lot of French ones actually, that this is the way it's done. And with the Jack Frost blouses, usually you just work it up to the same height. Also, one thing that I have noticed, and something that I have to constantly be aware of, just because it's a vintage pattern does not mean that it's perfect. You still have to question yourself about, why am I doing this? Does this actually make sense? Or is this just a mistake? Because now that I'm going through all these patterns, I do notice that there are quite a lot of mistakes in these vintage patterns. I mean, computers weren't widely available in the 30s. So, people really relied on their skills and just kind of take the pattern as inspiration or as a grain of salt, and then you kind of do things on your own and figure it out in that way. So that's kind of the approach that I'm trying to stick to. Just because a pattern tells you to do this certain thing doesn't mean that it is correct or that it will also work for you. So that is something that I try to keep in mind. And yes, this worked splendidly. I also took out about 3 centimeters at the bottom just to create a bit more of a cropped fit. And yeah, I'm just very happy with how it has turned out. I still have a bunch of things that I would like to talk about, but I think I'm going to leave most of that for the next episode. I will be talking about this sweater right here that I'm wearing, and also this cardigan that I've been struggling with for quite some time. This is a French pattern from the 1930s. This is an English one from the 1930s. And today I think I will end it with this one right here. It's looking quite weird because I haven't blocked it yet, and it's looking kind of weird at the moment. But I think this is the best fitting thing I have made so far on the knitting machine in terms of shoulders, yoke fit. Okay, so let me tell you a bit about this piece. So it is called a jumper with a little soft bow. Now the bow is not here yet. I still have to make it, but it's supposed to be a moss stitch bow. So that's going to come here at some point. I am going to do that by hand because moss stitch on the machine is, if you don't have an electric carriage, is very time consuming, and it's faster to just do it by hand. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I don't know where this pattern is from. I got it from a reseller. I got a PDF essentially. I think they're called Vintage Knitting Affair. I'll leave a link to the place where I got the pattern. But looking at the pattern, my guess is that it's either from Stitchcraft or Good Needlework in the UK, but my guess is Good Needlework. So Good Needlework from the 30s is what I think it is. In any case, reading the pattern, this is supposed to be a kind of basic first project, first garment for a knitter, a new knitter. So they try to make it as simple as possible. So you start off with 1 by 1 rib and you work it for quite some time. It's a pretty thick band, and then once you switch to stockinette stitch, you heavily increase on one row to create this very nice puff. And then what you do afterwards is you you just work your way up until the armhole shaping. I had the same thing as with the previous sweaters, that the shoulders were too wide, so I ended up drafting some new sleeves and the armhole as well. As you can see, a lot is taken from the sides because I really wanted this sweater to sit within my shoulder bone here, so that you have this very nice big puff, which is here, which you can see here on the side. So yeah, I drafted my first sleeve. I was thinking, oh, maybe I have it around here, but I actually unraveled it already. Maybe I have a picture of myself wearing it, but I drafted the first sleeve and I set it in. And yeah, the construction of the sleeve is pretty straightforward. The sleeve is knit as follows. You start off with half of the stitches at the bottom, and then you knit straight for a couple of rows. Then you increase at the opening here. So you increase stitches at the opening here every 4 rows about 3 times. And then you knit a symmetrical piece here, and that's where you join them. So this is all knit flat, by the way. And that's essentially when you start casting off consistently up until the top of the sleeve cap, and then you cast off all of the stitches, and then you're supposed to gather the sleeve at the top right here, this is by the way my first time that I'm doing such a heavy gather, and it was so much fun. I found a video on YouTube on how to gather sleeves, so I will leave a link to that in the description box below. Very helpful, and yeah, it was great. So once you've done that, you have to go back in with a crochet hook and single crochet all around the sleeve, and that also helps to cinch it in. And you also crochet a loop. I didn't know what type of loop to, well, there were no instructions on the loop, so basically I chained and then I single crocheted on the inside with white, and then on the outside with blue, which goes all the way around. And then I made a crochet button, which I filled with some scrap yarn for volume. So this is actually a pretty straightforward and easy crocheted button. I've seen it in a number of vintage knitting books. Sometimes they used molds where you basically just knit a piece of fabric and then you put this button mold, well, you cover a button mold with it, and so the fabric which you knit with is also the same fabric for your buttons. And these molds are still available. I found some here in the Netherlands as well, so I'm excited to give those a go in the future. So yeah, I just used those instructions. I did find someone who wrote a free pattern for these buttons on Ravelry, so I'll leave a link to their pattern in the description box below. So yeah, I did that for the first sleeve, and it turned out not looking all that nice for some reason. Well, for one, I made the sleeve cap too high. I unfortunately didn't take into account the original height of the sleeve cap, which was really shallow. It was about 5 centimeters. And so what happened was I got a very long sleeve and it was just not looking that nice. Also, the original sleeve length was a bit too long in my opinion as well, in order to get a nice puff. So what I ended up doing was I took some length from the sleeve. I'm putting my hand here as if you can see it, but I took some length here past the sleeve cap. I took that out, and then I recalculated my sleeve cap again, but then with a height that was similar to the original. And yeah, just set in the sleeve, and it's looking pretty good. This one doesn't use any closures. Usually there are closures with vintage knitwear, like hook and eye, buttons or zips. Because it's so close fitting, your head can't really get in there without a nice big opening. But with this one, actually, you have this V shape here. Well, actually, it's not a V shape. It's just a slit, essentially. But yeah, there's going to be a bow tie all around here, so there's actually no need for closure. So that's what I've got so far. I'm going to try and knit this sleeve again today or tomorrow, and then seam it, and then I'm gonna knit the bow section by hand. Yeah, pretty neat. I like the way it's looking. So I think that's where I'm going to leave this podcast. Oh, I did want to mention the yarn again. It's the same Donegal Irish Heather. Only in this case, it's in the color Berry Crush, I believe. I'll leave a code here in post. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know if there's anything you would like to see from me, something you don't like. I appreciate all the feedback. In any case, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye bye!